is the Leon Charney Report. And now, here is your host, Leon Charney.
Hi, I'm Leon Charney, and this is another Leon Charney Report. And today we have a couple of authors on, but each of them is very interesting in his own right. We're going to talk about Stolitsnetsin later, but now we're going to talk about the king of Jordan, who was very friendly with a Jewish carpenter called Mendel Cohen. And we have his daughter on the show and her husband, who have written a book called A Bridge Across the Jordan. It's got terrific write-ups. And New York Times gave you a big plug on Sundays. Get a Sunday plug in New York Times, you had to give them a little hummus, you know, something had to happen there.
Okay.
Adaia, this is an interesting name.
Yes.
Adaia, it's related to Lord, to the God?
It's a biblical name. The root is God's jewel. Quite a job.
Is that what you say about your husband?
Well, that's what it says about me.
Oh, okay.
But the meaning of the name Abraham, I'm sure you know. It's father of many nations.
Right. So you guys are pretty well with names.
Right.
All right. It's a fascinating story. King Abdullah was the guy who really started Transjordan at that time.
He
founded the country, and a very interesting guy. Had a couple of mistresses and wives, and you know all that stuff.
Right.
But how did Mendel Cohen get to Jordan?
Well, it was by accident. He was working at the palace of the High Commissioner in Jerusalem. And it was the time that the High Commissioner was on his way back to Scotland. He was going to retire. And my father was hired to take care of his belongings and have him shipped back to Scotland. And as he was working there, in came Emir Abdullah to bid farewell to the High Commissioner. And as he looked at the floor, where that had the rugs were rolled up already, he looked at the floor and he said, "This is the kind of floor I want in my palace. I've been trying to get it for some time and have not been successful. How did you get it done?" The commissioner said, "It's very easy. The man who's responsible is next door. Do you want to meet him?" Well, he came in, and my father met the king, and they spoke in Arabic. And the king invited him to come to Jordan to see if he could install the floor in his palace. And that was the beginning of a 10-year relationship, because from installing the floor came the whole renovation of Abdullah's palace, then building the house for Abdullah's third wife, building houses for the ministers, doing all kinds of renovation in Amman, trying to put together a medical center together with the head of Hadassah Hospital.
He became a diplomat.
Yes, right.
An ambassador.
An ambassador in a way, right.
He was an ambassador not in the political sense, but in the personal sense.
Yeah, obviously.
Because he never had any governmental role or function.
What year was this?
This was from 1937 to 48. Now, in 1937, it was no mean task to go to Amman at that time.
Yeah, how did you go? By car, by horse?
They used to go by armored car, because this was the time when Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti, was instigating a lot of riots on moving vehicles. And it was a very, very dangerous mission, but Abdullah sent an armored car to my father's factory. And they took him at night. They traveled by night and came to Amman back and forth. It was a very, very scary situation for us, for the family, to know that my father was exposed to this kind of danger.
Did the Jewish agency know that he was doing this?
I don't think so. But, you know, there are no secrets in Israel, you know? Everybody knows everybody.
Well, he would be a valuable contact.
Yeah, they never used him. They never used him because my father was really an apolitical person by principle.
Okay.
He did not want to belong to a party. He didn't want to represent a government. It was all done on a personal basis.
Well, but the Mossad, at that time there was no Mossad, but they could have been in touch with him.
I remember that in his office, the office of my father-in-law, he had a huge poster. And the poster says, "I don't belong to any party. I want to serve the people of Jerusalem." In one of his celebrations, he had this poster in his office.
But in all this personal relationship, he was in fact an ambassador, because he had an opportunity to meet many of the ministers. By the way, one of the ministers on the court was one he befriended. Initially, they were rivals because he was threatened by my father's appearance and the fact that he also joined. That he became the king's right-hand man, and that minister was also the king's right-hand man.
Right. So there's
and
jealousy.
There was
jealousy in a palace court. Not unusual.
Right. But this guy came to be friends with my father, and he was responsible to bringing Golda to meet Abdullah.
The famous meeting.
On the eve of the war. So he became friend of Israel, and so did Abdullah's third wife.
Was she black?
She was black, yes.
How did I know that?
You read the book.
That's it.
And
My producer doesn't know that. He didn't read the book, believe me.
and she was not responsible, but participated in transporting the children from Tehran to Israel after the war. She had a part in this. So my father's friendship at the court really had a lot of implications.
I'm sure it did. And I he may not have been in the diplomatic service, but these contacts, I know I've been involved in that all my life, are invaluable, and they look for those things because you can tell very small things from what's happening by the way he was decorating the palace, by the way he was spending his money, his reaction to women, his reaction to the religious people, his reaction to everything. You're standing, and what did he do? Well, Abraham, let's bring you into this a little bit. Why did you get involved in writing this book? Why don't you leave it to Adaia?
Now, first let's understand that we were aware, we knew that naturally that for 10 years he was in and out of Jordan, his project in Jordan.
You knew? Were you married then? No.
No, when I came to the family, I heard about it, naturally, and Adaia lived through it, so she knew. What we didn't know, and this is important to understand, that he was writing a memoir about it.
A diary.
10 years after his death, we discovered the diary. And our book is based on his diary.
And it was published in Israel first.
Right.
And the Israeli publication
it was a big seller there.
The Israeli publication is his work. No corrections, no changes on our part at all.
Who published it in Israel?
Amoved, which is
big,
a
very
big
publishing company.
Right.
And so you took it and you broadened it into a big book.
Now, we had a different agenda, Adaia and I, and this may be you are speaking about this point. Adaia wanted to write the story of her father.
She wanted to give tribute to her father.
A memorial. I wanted to write the story of Abdullah because I was intrigued by his life.
All right, now we're getting
a man that established a country from nothing, from roaming tribes who fought each other. He brought them together. There was no Transjordan before Abdullah. There was only a geographical place, but not a nation nor a country.
So you looked at it from the sense that the political, socio-economic development, and that's your background, right? You're a doctor of...
No, I'm a professor of education. This is not my background at all.
What do you mean? To learn is to educate?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I meant I'm not
She's a
professor.
clinical psychologist, so she can shrink you, but you can educate her.
When I go somewhere, I call her and I say, Adaia, how do I feel?
And she tells you?
No, I answer with a question. Why can't you tell yourself?
All right, we got to take a break. We'll come right back. And you know what? The King of Jordan, the present King of Jordan, invited this couple back to Jordan to have a little chat, whatever they did. And we'll talk about it. We'll be right back. A Bridge Across Jordan is the book. It's the friendship between a Jewish carpenter and the King of Jordan. The carpenter happened to be the father. His name is Mendel Cohen of Adaia Shumsky. She's married for a couple of years. And Abraham Shumsky.
We are newlywed, only 50 years.
50 years?
Right.
Almost 51.
Really? In the rabbinate?
Rabbinate, right.
You don't have any conversion problems?
No problem.
You heard the ambassador here,
Yes,
right?
we
No
did.
conversion problems, right?
Right.
All right, so you went back to visit the King of Jordan.
Right.
What year was that?
1995.
1990, after the peace treaty.
Yes.
We wrote a letter to him, and to our amazement, within 2 weeks, we got a letter, partly typed, partly in his own handwriting, inviting us to come see the palace, which is not, maybe you're familiar with the place, which is not a place for tourists, and examine it in terms of what we called it, in the footsteps of my father-in-law.
Very nice.
Yeah.
He's a charming guy, the king.
He is. Now, when we were visited...
He appears at more Jewish affairs now than he does for Arab affairs. You know that? I think he's a little bit Jewish. Maybe you've checked that out when you checked out Abdullah.
Well, we have to see where Abdullah's connections were. Yeah.
What kind of guy was Abdullah? He must have been a brilliant leader, no?
He was a fascinating person, in my judgment, a very tragic person. Because let's remember, if things would go right for his family, he would be today the king. His family, I mean the Hashemites, would be today the kings of Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
They lost Arabia. So
Well, he was assassinated.
he was assassinated because he was the first leader in Arab history that was ready to make peace with Israel. The two committees met. He thought that they reached an agreement. He went around and he gave flowers to each member of the committee to celebrate the fact that they came to an agreement. But his cabinet, for the first time in his life, did not approve
They didn't want
the
peace.
agreement.
Was your father alive when he was assassinated?
Yes, and he writes about the assassination as well as the period following the assassination. He also writes about the war. And one interesting episode during the war, 1948, when Abdullah conquered Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem was under siege, he wrote a communique to Glab Pasha, who was the commander of the army at that time, of the Arab Legion, and instructed him to refrain from attacking two homes. One was the home of Mendel Cohen, and the other was the home of Ticho,
Really?
his ophthalmologist.
Really?
And to pay compensation if this would happen. It did
That's
happen.
interesting.
And
It happened.
Mendel Cohen heard about it. He looked at the damage to his house, and he said in Arabic, I remember, Ma lefat mat. In other words, what happened died. And he didn't ask for any compensation.
So your father obviously was very upset with the whole situation because he knew the human side of Jordan,
Right,
and they had the legionnaires in there trying to slaughter the Jews.
Right. He did not believe this was going to happen because he knew the side of the man that wanted peace, and the side of the man actually who hated war. Now, you have to know that Abdullah suffered an incredible defeat when he was fighting the Saudis in 1919. This was his whole army was demolished. 2,000 people. He was the only person with a few slaves who remained alive. And after that, he came to his father and really urged him to continue to work with the British government and to settle all differences diplomatically. He was really opposed to war in person. However, he was torn between his obligation to other Arab countries, as well as driven by his own ambition. It was a tremendous ambition because he really wanted to rule the total Middle East.
His dream was what we call the dream of Greater Syria, to be that the Hashemite family will be the rulers of Iraq, Syria, Palestine, which then was Palestine,
be the Arab leader.
And Jordan. Yeah.
Right.
Did your father meet Golda Meir?
No, I don't think he met her in person, no.
Did she know about your father, or you don't know?
I don't know about that part.
We know that when we came to Teddy Kollek to speak about the book and asked for an endorsement, he said to us, let me tell you a story. I still have furniture that your father, he spoke to Adaia, that your father made for me. But Golda, we have no idea.
So,
maybe he did know Golda. You know why? His brother was the secretary, Golda's secretary.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I forgot that part completely. My uncle, my father's brother, was secretary to Golda Meir.
So obviously, look what we found out.
And then
innovation.
Then he became the Minister of Labor, but first he was the secretary for Golda.
So your uncle was the Minister of Labor?
Later on,
under
Ben-Gurion.
Under Ben-Gurion's government.
Right.
So obviously he knew Golda. And they probably trailed your father for 10 years, a little Shibet guy that, in the sand.
And I wouldn't be surprised that there was more that went on there than,
and I'm sure it's not in the diary. Right, I'm sure that something went on. I mean, that's a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
How did you find the king Hussein, aside from him being very pleasant, you think he really is in charge of the country now in Jordan?
He is very, very popular, as is his brother Hassan. And even talking to other people, we had a meeting with the president of Amman University. And he really gave us a sense of what was going on, and that is that generally the population at large is extremely backing Hussein, and most of the population is behind him.
Especially the old population.
Yeah,
but he has
Palestinians.
But he has
However,
opposition
there
among
is-
the Palestinians, definitely, and among the fundamentalists.
Because this show was downtown in Amman, Jordan, when the peace treaty was countersigned in Washington. I remember we were in downtown Jordan, and believe me, a lot of Palestinian denizens of Jordan were not happy about it. There was a big outcry, and I always worry about the king because I think he's a very important player out there.
We were in the Araba, the place where the peace treaty was signed, and we were told by the guide that the area around it was a field mine. So I think symbolically you have the symbolism of a peace treaty, a small island within mines, within field of mines. So this is, in my judgment, the symbolism of the situation now, that the king and his brother, Hassan, they do everything they can to promote the peace. But on the other hand, there are still mines.
It's
Their
tough.
forces
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll come right back to continue the conversation with the Shumskys on a bridge across the Jordan. We'll be right back. We're back with the Shumskys. They've written A Bridge Across the Jordan. It's a story of Mendel Cohen, who was a carpenter, Jewish carpenter, and King Abdullah, where he went to Jordan in 1937 to be the carpenter for 10 years at the palace. Fascinating story. And a lot of people have endorsed this book, including Yitzhak Davon, Jimmy Carter, and Teddy Kollek. It's a pretty good group of people there.
By the way, the book is liked not only by the Jewish people, also by the Christian people. And the reason
I
is
think the
they
Muslims
speak
too could
about
like
the
it.
Jewish carpenter.
Jewish carpenter
Because
is
they
the
speak
one.
about the Jewish carpenter.
So Jesus?
They think of
we were on Father's Tom program.
Really?
And he said to us, oh, my people will like it. It's the Jewish carpenter.
I guess so. He's the second greatest Jew carpenter in Jewish history. I mean, you got Jesus number one, but
Right.
Mendel Cohen is number two.
right.
And you asked me before about the movie.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
somebody ought to do a movie about this?
Yeah.
Now, by the way, the Kirkus Review, their first line, this is the first review that we had of the book, says that the book is something between Lawrence of Arabia and Anna and the King of Siam.
Yeah.
When I read it, immediately I thought about a movie, only I couldn't make up my mind what role Adaia is going to play.
All right, well, who should play your father? De Niro, he plays everybody.
Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins?
Right.
And
How
who
about
plays
that?
you? Deborah Winger?
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Shumsky, Mr. Shumsky, Dr. Shumsky. You don't get into it, right? Because he's
No,
just a writer.
no.
He's not an activist.
No.
You have brothers and sisters?
I
and things?
had two brothers. One is still alive. They were children when this was going on, and actually we grew up essentially as almost a fatherless family because of this.
He lived in Jordan a
He
lot?
used to come back and forth. He lived in Jordan a lot. He lived in the Philadelphia Hotel, and came back and forth. And now
Was that the Ritz-Carlton at that time?
That was the major hotel at that time. And when we were in Amman, we wanted to see the Philadelphia Hotel. It's no longer there. It was destroyed. There's a story here about the Philadelphia Hotel. Abdullah's third wife was a very, very clever woman with regard to business deals. And she was able to acquire ownership of the House of Government, which she thought she would sell to the Philadelphia Hotel because she knew that they were going to expand their premises. And she succeeded to do this for a lot of money. And with that money, bought more and more real estate. And when she died, they discovered, when Abdullah died, they discovered that most of his personal assets were in her name.
Really?
She was a rather powerful woman.
And she's the only one that didn't live in a harem. The other two wives, the major wives, what was called the Greater Emira and the Minor Emira, they lived in the harem, in the palace. Whereas she had her own house, and she went to Jerusalem on her own. She was much freer.
The big question in Israeli-Jordanian history is why King Hussein went into the Six-Day War when he was pre-warned by Asa Weizmann and the whole chief of staff.
Yeah.
And the story is that he got false information that Egypt was winning the war. And had he understood differently, he probably would have not entered that war. And it's a great, I think, a classical historical mistake of in the Middle East that he entered that war.
And he knows it. I think he knows it. And it's interesting, you know, the rivalry between Jordan and Egypt, the competition about who was winning the war, was also existent during the 1948 war.
Right.
Where Abdullah was chief of command in name, but actually he and Nasser had a lot of trouble with each other, and promised ammunition to each other, did not deliver. So they sabotaged each other's efforts during the war.
It's not uncommon. I mean, everybody has. You should know. You're a psychologist. That this rush for power is overwhelming. But Jordan has now become a key player, very friendly with Israel, and I say the King of Jordan, seriously, he's more at Jewish events than he is at Arab events. What's your opinion? You're both Israelis. You think that this peace Oslo agreement can go forward? What do you people think?
We are more optimistic than others. And the reason we are more optimistic than others is because we look at it in terms of history. In the beginning, I still remember, I met Yitzhak Rabin only once. I asked him one question. The question was, is there any discussion between Israelis, he was ambassador, and the Arabs? And he said, they believe we don't exist. How can they speak with a person who doesn't exist, or with people who don't exist? Today, both sides know that the two sides exist. And there is a beginning. A lot of hurdles, a lot of difficulties, a lot of dangers, as I said before, mines. But at least there is a beginning.
And there's a standing peace with Egypt and with Jordan.
Well, we know a lot about that, but we also know that King Hussein had a lot of trouble with Yasser Arafat on Black September.
Oh, yes.
And he had to throw him out, and you know, it's not an easy life over there for the king either.
We have several stories in the book, by the way, how Israel helped Jordan in times of trouble. Even during
this massacre, during the Arafat rebellion.
I'm sure they gave him intelligence, and I'm sure they...
Oh, actually, they had...
Well, Rabin and the king used to meet all the time, and there was a safe house they had in Israel. He used to do that. I know that he met off a boat many times. And there was a Jewish cardiologist in London where they always used to meet.
And once they saved them from the Syrian attack. The Syrians were 15 miles from Amman.
I believe that the King of Jordan would rather go south than north. He loves Israel much more than he loves Syria. I have no doubts about it.
Abdullah loved Israel too. Every time he went to Israel and he saw how green it was, he would come back, he would literally cry. He would say, as my father tells about this, why can't we do what they do over there on the other side? And this is why he started bringing people from across the river to help him bring Jordan into the 20th century.
Tell me, they have psychologists in Jordan today?
In Jordan, I am sure they do.
You think they're in therapy there?
Well, they certainly had psychologists even at the time of Abdullah, because Abdullah's oldest son was mentally ill.
Oh, so they probably did.
He was treated there.
We're out of time.
Thank you
for coming on.
Thank you for inviting us.
Fascinating book. Don't forget, it's A Bridge Across the Jordan. And probably one day you'll see it in a movie. Continuing our show on culture, we've just put you together with the King of Jordan, the old King of Jordan, and a Jewish carpenter. Now you know how Jordan and Israel got together. And now we're going to study a very important personality during the Second World War, and his name was Dr. Korczak. How did I get to this story? I was having dinner one day with Bob Weil, who's a great editor at St. Martin's Press, and a very good friend of mine who's a psychiatrist and an MD and philosopher. And he says, all of a sudden, in a meeting, one of the heroes of my life is Dr. Korczak. It's a true story, Betty. And everybody got astounded. And Weil said, you know what, I did the book on Korczak. You got to bring on Betty Jean Lifton. So we brought you on to talk about Dr. Korczak. You can explain better who he was than I can, but he was a great Jewish doctor who went to his death trying to protect children during the Second World War, and he was a children's right doctor. I mean, he did fantastic things. Had he lived, he'd probably be one of the great people of the century.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of his background. He's Polish?
Yes, he was Polish, but he was also Jewish.
Right.
So he was Polish Jew, and he had an orphanage for Jewish children in Warsaw, and he had an orphanage for Polish children. But he was primarily one of the great children's writers. And he was also an educator and a doctor. But he was a children's writer like James Barrie or Hans Christian Andersen. And sometimes people only talk about the way he died with the orphans of the Warsaw Ghetto. But it would be like thinking about James Barrie and just writing about the end of his life rather than the whole life.
Right.
Because Korczak not only wrote for children, but he lived for them. And this is really, for me, the message that his life has and his death. He gave his life for children at the very end in the same way that he devoted his whole life to homeless children.
He was a doctor, born, well...
He was born in Warsaw.
How long?
In 1878.
Oh, so he was a pretty old man during...
Well, depends on what you call old. He was about 64 when he died. And he was in the ghetto for about 2.5 years.
But he did great things in his lifetime, way before the war. I mean...
Yes, he was famous.
Why was he so dedicated to children? Do you know?
It's a good question. I think, first of all, he was an artist, and he was a sensitive man. And he was a man whose father went crazy when he was in his teenage years. And so he saw what suffering was.
Maybe he felt orphaned?
He felt orphaned by that. They'd been a very wealthy family, a very prominent family. His father was a lawyer and also a writer. And suddenly he was gone and in and out of...
It wasn't easy in Poland to be a prominent Jew, a lawyer and a doctor in those days.
They were, they were the assimilated Jews, and they were Polish nationals, and they believed this is the end of the 19th century. They believed that that the Jews and the Poles were going to be brothers. They fought in some of the uprisings together, and it was at the height of this optimism by both the Polish intellectuals and the Jews that, they were going to make it together. And Korczak inherited that from his father and from his uncle and from his grandfather. His grandfather was a member of the Haskalah, and he too believed that there was a future for the Poles and the Jews to really work together.
Were they religious at all?
They were religious in the sense that Korczak's father translated the Talmud.
Really?
Into Polish.
Really?
And Korczak's uncle had a Jewish calendar in Polish.
Really?
And so they wanted the Poles to understand who the Jews were, in the same way they wanted the Jews to learn Polish and to be part of the Polish society. It was an interesting time.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Did you go to Poland to do research here?
I did, and it was very difficult for me because I've spent most of my adult years in the Far East. I was a correspondent in Vietnam, and I lived for many years in Japan.
Really?
And I wrote on...
Who did you write for?
I did magazine work, but when I went to Vietnam, I was accredited to the Tokyo Evening News.
Really? So you were on air?
Yeah. And
you worked Vietnam, then Liz Trotter. You remember her from NBC?
Who?
Liz Trotter.
I didn't meet her.
She went to Vietnam also.
No.
She's been on. So you were through the Vietnam War and the whole business? I mean, you wrote about it?
I was in and out. I wasn't there, for a long time, but I would go in and out. I wrote a book called The Children of Vietnam, about how the children suffered.
Why are you so interested in children?
That's a good question, but I can answer it very easily. I think it's because I'm an adopted person.
Uh-huh.
And someone who's adopted has a family, a wonderful adoptive family, but they also have a family they've lost.
Right.
And so they're very sensitive to loss and separation.
So you're always searching.
I think so. You're symbolically searching, and then one day you go out and you really search.
And your parents, I guess your foster parents? Or
My adoptive family.
Adopted family, you felt very close with them?
I felt very close with them, yes, but I waited until they died to
Now you're
search.
writing a new book about this, aren't you?
Yes. I've written a number of books on the psychology of adopted people. The last one was Journey of the Adopted Self, A Quest for Wholeness. The idea that finding the past and putting it together with who you are today is a way of becoming whole, rather than splitting off a part of yourself.
It's interesting. So you try to merge them in a sense.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Korczak, probably something in his background compelled him or impelled
Yes,
him
I think so.
to do this.
Korczak was a father. He used to say, I'm both the father and the mother to my orphans. And he was a parent who didn't abandon his children. In other words, when he was in the ghetto with them, he didn't have to go in the ghetto. He was so famous.
Is that right?
Yes. All of his he had a Catholic orphanage too. And all of his Catholic disciples said, don't go in, we'll help you and so forth, we'll hide you. And he wouldn't leave his children to go into the ghetto. And then he kept them there for 2.5 years, clothed with food, with medicine. He was just like a skeleton at the end. But those children lived. And at the very end, when they were breaking up the ghetto, and everyone knew that wherever they were going, resettlement in the East, that it wasn't going to be a very good resettlement, all of his Catholic disciples again said, what good is it for you to go with them? Live for the children that will be staying behind.
It's not a bad statement, by the way. But he didn't want to do it.
He said things like, a doctor doesn't abandon a sick child in the middle of the night,
Really?
And you don't abandon children like this. This was a man who couldn't bear to see children suffer, and so he couldn't bear the thought of those children going off without him. He was like a shepherd. He thought, if I'm with them, they'll live. If I'm with them, they'll be okay. And he stayed with them.
It's a tearjerker, really.
To the very end.
To think about this. How come, do doctors study him in medical school? This friend of mine was a doctor, just knew all about him. I don't know where he knew it. Maybe just read a book about him.
Was he from Poland?
His parents were.
Yeah, well, that's how I knew.
He's famous in Poland?
He's very famous.
To this day, too?
And what's interesting is he's maybe more famous with the Polish people than with the Jewish people because he wrote in Polish. I met Miłosz, the poet, and he grew up on King Mat, which is Korczak's Peter Pan. And he said, I don't understand why the American Jews don't realize that there were many Poles that really cared about the Jewish people and really, wanted to help them. We weren't all anti-Semites, and Korczak was one of the people that we read when we were growing up.
All right, contrast that statement with the ambassador to the United Nations from Poland who was on this show, who told me, and I've said it on the show numerous times, that anti-Semitism is indigenous to the culture of our country.
Or maybe to all of Europe, in a way. It isn't just Poland. The Jews lived with the Poles for 1,000 years, but it took the Germans to have the Holocaust for this to happen.
Now, Korczak had children of his own?
No, he never
had no
married.
children? He never married?
And we can think about the complex reasons why a man doesn't marry, but he said it was because he was a son of a madman and he didn't want to pass. This is a time when they believed that this was a genetic thing to have mental illness. But it's possible that, his father had syphilis. A lot of people had syphilis then, but we don't know. It's not documented.
Was there anything about his sexuality? Does anybody know anything about that?
No.
Nothing at all?
No.
It's fascinating, the cause and effect between these great people.
I know.
What causes this?
That's right.
And then, and why you're so involved. Anyway, we're going to cut for a break. We'll come back. The book is King of the Children, The Life and Death of Janusz Korczak, which is a fascinating story, one of the best of the century, according to insiders who are very close to me, and I trust them. So we'll be right back. Don't leave us. The name of the book is King of the Children. It's written by Betty Jean Lifton. It's a brilliant book about Janusz Korczak. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. But if you need any better testimony to Mr. Dr. Korczak, was my producer Andy Welke, who is of Polish descent, says that he is the most famous man that he remembers that came out of that era. So if you don't believe in Andy Welke, you can't believe in the show, and therefore you have to believe in what's going on here. Korczak was very well honored by the UN in the 70s, correct?
The UN declared 1978 and 1979 the year of the child and the year of Janusz Korczak. So they were very influenced. And the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child was influenced by Korczak's Declaration of the Rights of the Child, because there were some Polish people on that commission. So I think
he was really at the forefront for, abuse of children and harassment and all this.
He was a pioneer.
That we're reading about today.
That's right.
Is he studied, are his books studied a lot too, or you don't know, Betty?
His books aren't translated into English. Really? So this is the great shock. They're translated into German, all of his work. They're translated into Italian, French, into Hebrew.
No
They're
English.
Not translated in English.
Are there any surviving relatives of his family?
No.
Nobody.
There were no survivors. As a biographer, it was very difficult for me.
All right, personally, how did you get involved in this?
Well, as I told you, I'd been living in the Far East most of my adult life, and then my husband decided to write a book on the Nazi doctors. And we went
pleasant subject.
Yes, on the psychology of the doctors to try to understand. Because after all, they take the Hippocratic Oath, and how do men who are trained to be healers become killers?
One of my first clients was a Mengele child originally.
Really?
It was terrible. Terrible.
Yes. It might be in my husband's book. It was called The Nazi Doctors.
I'm sure it is. I don't want to mention names on the show.
And it was on Auschwitz, and on Mengele and a number of the doctors. Anyway, as I was living in Munich with him and reading through the
Another
library,
pleasant experience.
reading through the library on the Holocaust, which he had collected, I noticed in all of the books there would be this one paragraph about this doctor who walked through the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto with his orphans, and how the orphans were well dressed, and the orphans held themselves up with dignity, and they walked with pride. And nobody could understand who these children were, and everyone recognized Korczak, that they understood those are Korczak's children. But that's the only thing it said in that paragraph. So I thought, to save my soul, I wanted to follow a good doctor. So I spent the next, I won't tell you how many years researching it. I knew nothing about Poland. I knew nothing about Eastern Europe. And I didn't even have Yiddish. If I'd had Yiddish, I was raised by Reform Jews, and so if I'd had any of those languages.
Do you speak Polish now?
No, because Korczak's Polish in that era was still different from the modern Polish.
So how did you read all the...
I got grants, and I got researchers.
Who gave you the grants?
Ford Foundation and
nice.
Durrott Foundation, and some individuals, and so I had enough money to pay translators and to...
The book got phenomenal reviews years ago. What, 1988 it came
1988 it came out, yes.
The Times gave it a tremendous review.
Yes.
Elie Wiesel's given a terrific
Robert
review.
Coles, because Robert Coles recognized him as one of the moral men, and because he was really a pioneer in moral education. His orphanages were not just orphanages, they were just communities. And he wanted the children ran them. They had their own parliaments, their own newspapers. They had their own children's courts.
Really?
This is something just beginning in America now, the children's courts. And he was one of the pioneers in that. The idea, if children can learn what justice is, then they can believe in justice. And then they can go out and help form just societies out in the so-called real world. So that was his dream for them. And so Robert Coles, would be very interested in him. But there were people all over the country who recognized this beautiful spirit, this man who believed in children as our future, the future of civilization.
All right, when you did the rounds in '88, when this book came out, were television shows receptive to you?
Yes.
Were they interested in it?
Mm-hmm. Very.
And,
yes.
and was there a lot of follow-up? Did anybody try to make a film about this man's life?
Yes, I got a number of people that got in touch with me. In fact, BBC wanted to do a mini-series on him, and then some producers out in Hollywood. But at that same time, Bida's film came out. And everyone backed away because they thought, well, now here's a film on Korczak. We shouldn't be competing now. So, and I was so upset when Schindler's List came out. I felt that Spielberg should have done Korczak rather than Schindler.
You think he knows about Korczak?
I hope so. I don't know.
If you don't know, Stephen,
yes.
This is a great topic, and someone ought to do a film on it. I'd
like to see Robin Williams play Korczak.
Korczak?
I think Robin Williams.
Because in a way, it's a happy story.
Well, not only that, Korczak was so magical with children. Mm-hmm. He was really a comedian. Danny Kaye could have played him. And then with adults, he was very serious, and he wasn't really interested in adults. But this was a very magical man, and it was this magic that the children were attached to. And it was this magic that helped them, because he was trying to help them become better people. He had all kinds of strategies, but they were games.
Great story. We'll cut for a break. We'll come right back and finish the last segment with Betty Jean Lifton. The name of this book is King of Children. It's in reprint, but we thought it's such an important topic that we ought to talk about, even though it's 10 years or 9 years after the original. We'll be right back. Betty Jean Lifton is the writer, and The King of Children, a phenomenal biography of Janusz Korczak. I can't pronounce it correctly. And this story really is not known enough in America, and the reason we put Betty Jean on, aside from the fact that she's a great writer and she talks a lot about adoptive children, writes a lot of terrific books, we thought this topic and this man was really important for the American public to hear and see again. So we're talking about him. It's very hard to find in history, people who have such a selfless ego. You know what I mean, Betty?
Exactly.
I mean, chances are that most people would have accepted what the Catholics said and said, all right, I continue to live because I want to give what I have and continue it. And yes, this guy, he's a real martyr.
That's right.
He went down as a martyr.
That's right.
Does The Polish government today, do they acknowledge him in any way?
They did acknowledge him before. I don't know now, but strangely enough, the communist government had helped support the Korczak orphanage.
Really?
Because they wanted to show the American Jews, I think, that they weren't anti-Semitic, and so they supported the orphanage.
How about in Israel? Any reaction to this?
Oh, yes. In Israel, many streets are named after Korczak. The schools are named after him. They have all kinds of educational programs, progressive education in his spirit. Yeah.
Is the book, have his works been translated to Hebrew?
All of them, yes.
So therefore he's very famous over there.
Yeah.
Any reason why no one translated into English that you know of?
I really don't know, because I think part of it, though, is that our whole educational system doesn't come out of Europe in the way that he would be in the tradition of Pestalozzi.
Right.
And so it's a whole other wing of education. And therefore the American educators, I would love this book to become known to American teachers.
Well, we're trying right now.
Yes.
Was he was he a pediatrician? Or
He started off as a pediatrician. And he worked for 7 years in the Jewish hospital in Warsaw. And one day he said, what am I doing? I'm treating these children and I'm getting them well, and then I send them back to the slums. And they have no future. I want to treat the whole child. And then he said, I want to be the sculptor of the child's soul. So that when he was asked by Jewish philanthropists to head their orphanage, he was a famous writer already. And he accepted. Society couldn't understand what was going on. Why would the famous Janusz Korczak want to go take care of some slum kids in an orphanage? But they didn't understand that the doctor part of him, the healer, wanted to be the sculptor and wanted to really help these children in every aspect of their life, not just when they became sick physically.
I know you talked about his father. Did you find anything historically about how his mother affected him? How his mother,
yes. He was a mother's boy.
It sounds that way.
Yeah, he lived with his mother until he was 40. And he would live in the orphanage and in and out. But he was very close to his mother. And when his father died, he had to become the man of the family. He had to take over so much responsibility. I think that's why it happened.
And he had no brothers and sisters?
He had a sister.
She died during the war?
She died, and it's...
No children?
I had so much trouble doing research. I cannot tell you exactly how she died.
Right.
And her husband died very young, and so she left no children.
Wow.
And try to write a biography when nobody is, the immediate family, they're all gone.
How much time did you have to spend in Poland?
I went about 4 or 5 times and spent about a month each. And because there was also the Catholic orphanage too, which was so that I had to research not only the surviving Jews, of whom there weren't too many, but also the teachers and the children who survived from the other orphanage.
The name of the book is The King of the Children. We're running out of time, and it's written by Betty Jean Lifton and Elie Wiesel, USA Today, Jeffrey Wolf. Everybody's given us a rave review. It came out 10 years ago, but it's now in reprint and trade back. And I think that all of us owe some kind of tribute to this man, and I think Americans and Americana should start to get more involved with him. We want to thank Betty for coming on. Lots of luck with your new book, and we hope you'll visit us with your new book.
I'd like to.
To merge adoptive, that's a great topic.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. We gave you culture this week. Next week, politics or comedy. Take your pick. We don't tell you now. Next week.